Great. Okay, so welcome to this event. My name is Gerda Wielander. I'm the director of the Contemporary China Center here, and I'm going to chair today. I've also got my colleague, Professor Zhangbai Wang here, who is going to be the discussant of the papers. I should also say that this is very much a joint event today between the Contemporary China Center and Homelands, which is a really exciting hub on migration, exile, languages, and spaces that Professor Wang founded here at the University of Westminster and really has grown into a well-known and internationally recognized hub and now research center on research on migration and related aspects. So it's really great to be co-hosting this event today. I'm going to start by introducing our first speaker. We have three speakers today. And what I was going to do was going to introduce everybody at the start of their talk and then hand over for them to share their screen and their slides. And each speaker will speak for about 20 minutes. And then we will hand over to the next speaker who I will introduce. And at the end, Zhangbai will be providing a discussion before opening up for Q&A. So let me please just introduce our first speaker today. We are really happy to be able to welcome Professor Wing-Chung Ng, who is a professor of history and the chair of the history department at the University of Texas at San Antonio. So he's traveled very far. He's actually in London today. He did his PhD at the University of British Columbia, specializing in modern China with a focus on transnational mobility, identity formation, and community politics in the context of diaspora. And his more recent work, some of which we're going to hear today, delves into traditional Chinese music, theater, or opera, its consumption as entertainment and cultural markers, and its global circuitry. Professor Ng is a former Commonwealth Scholar, a fellow at the National Humanities Center, and a Fulbright Scholar. So without further ado, let me just unshare my own screen and hand over to you, Professor Ng, for your talk.
Thank you so much, Professor Wielander, for the very kind introduction. And I want to begin by thanking the two centers for co-hosting this event, and particularly Professor Wang, Zhangbai, for organizing this really excellent program this afternoon. So at this time, let me share screen. Okay. Can you all see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. And you can all hear me well, right?
Great. I can anyway. Yes, I think your sound is good.
Good. Let me set my own alarm. So I'm giving myself 20 minutes here. Just to be sure. I always have a tendency to overspeak and use up all my time. Okay, well, let me begin it this way. As researcher, you kind of feel the adrenaline rush when you get to talk about your sources, especially when the subject matter is rather obscure and understudied. And the sources are really extraordinary and fascinating to behold because of where they came from and what they can tell us under scrutiny. Well, the sources that I'm going to focus on in this talk are drawn from an ongoing research for a biography of a Cantonese opera musician, Wang Tao. He lived to the age of 101 and really enjoyed respect within the Cantonese opera circle on both sides of the Pacific, even though he lived very humbly for his entire life. And in this talk, I'm going to refer to him as Wang Tao as well as Master Wang because he taught music for much of his life, and also he usually assumed the role of the lead musician in an ensemble whenever he performed. Well, I started entertaining the idea of writing a biography of Master Wang almost 10 years ago, and I remember the exact moment I was at a book talk in Vancouver promoting a new monograph, The Rise of Cantonese Opera. And I learned that Master Wang had just passed away 2 weeks earlier in his adopted hometown, Vancouver, where he had lived the lengthier half of his long life. So I began the talk by paying homage to him, and I really did so with a tremendous sense of regret because, truth be told, I never met him in person. And I realized then the chance of getting to know him alive is gone. Uh, but I remember I was immediately struck by the idea of writing his biography. After all, who wouldn't be interested in working on a centennial biography, a life and a career of unrivaled longevity? So in the next couple of years, when I was still absorbed in a couple of other smaller projects, I started scouting for sources on Wang Tao. For example, while searching through the database of Hong Kong newspapers, which you see on the screen on your right-hand side, I came across a very brief report in 1961 on a gathering hosted by members of the Cantonese Opera Circle, especially Master Wang's students, to bid him farewell on the eve of his departure for Canada. And interestingly, here the reporter apparently mistaken Canada for the United States, something that our current president would love to have that kind of geographical imagination. Well, apparently, Wang Tao had quite a reputation then, and it is highly probable that it was this reputation that led to his recruitment by a Chinatown Music Association in Vancouver, Chinatown, that sponsored his immigration as an instructor in 1961. And talking about organization, I also got a hold of some publication, one of which you see on the left-hand side, publication issued by Chinatown organizations where Wang Tao was active. Because of Wang Tao's literacy in Chinese, a skill that is not common among his generation of immigrants, he usually filled the role of secretary at those organizations and was put in charge of record keeping as well as occasional publication projects. So we're talking about bits and pieces here and there, and illuminating as they are, they're clearly not enough to write a biography, right? And so I need a lot more. And it was in the summer of 2019, my search for the historical Wang Tao turned a corner. During a research trip to Vancouver, I was introduced to the family of Master Wang. And the family was very receptive to my project. I'm happy to report. The oldest daughter, Mary Wang, who is herself a studio artist based in Montreal, she is the custodian of her father's personal items. She's very enthusiastic. So in the following years, they began to share stories of their late father and mother with me. And before long, they also began to share with me some items from Wang Tao's personal effects, which was literally a treasure trove. And as Mary put it, her father was a classic hoarder who refused to throw away anything, and that's what historians love, right? And the content is very varied, including a stack of photo album. On the right-hand side, you see a picture of Wang Tao when he was picked up at the airport in February of 1961 by the members of the Music Society. There are also personal correspondence dating back to the 1950s. There's a small personal library of books. Right in the middle, there's some newspaper clipping that Wang Tao dutifully bound together and kept for the longest time. And there's also some personal self-writing, as well as writing project he undertook and complete in his 80s. So all these material constitute what I consider, what I call the memory world of Wang Tao. Things he had produced, he generated and preserved. and simply refused to part with to the end of his life. These are raw materials bearing traces of his personal life and tell a larger story about Cantonese opera, about migration, community, that altogether span a century, more than a century of time. Well, another breakthrough came while scouting for research materials at the Museum of Anthropology, where a major exhibition on Cantonese opera costumes was held in 1993. Well, some of these items are still on permanent display at the museum. And as it turned out, Wang To played a pivotal role in the acquisition of the exhibit items from Chinatown. And he also took an active interest in the preparation and the production of the exhibition. Well, as I will suggest later in my talk, the whole experience of participating in the exhibition was instrumental for the construction of his memory world. So let me talk briefly about give a brief history on Wang To's life. So who was Wang To? Well, he was born in Guangzhou in 1914, and when he lost his father at the age of 8, his mother was widowed with him and 5 other siblings, all at young age. And so, being the oldest of 3 boys, Wang To cut short his schooling and started an apprenticeship in local opera. Well, Wang To was still at the early phase of his music career when war broke out with Imperial Japan. The war from 1937 on to 1945 left Wang To with physical as well as emotional scars. Death was at the door more than once. And so while marveling at his survival, the young Wang To was so traumatized that in 1944, at the age of 30, he started jotting down life's experiences chronologically in what could be considered the beginning of a memoir. The writing continued for a couple of years, and after he accumulated about 60 pages of dense and cursive writing, he stopped. But he kept the notebook with him when he left for Hong Kong before 1949, and again when he traveled further still, this time to Canada in 1961. He would not touch that notebook for over 50 years. And then he resumed writing at the age of 90, finishing it in less than a year. Well, none of his children knew what the writing is about when Mary sent me a scanned copy because none of them know Chinese. So I became the first person privileged to read Wang To's unpublished life history. Well, I'll say more about this piece of writing later on. So Wang To launched his career in post-war Hong Kong in 1950s when he enjoyed some success in orchestra, played for Cantonese opera performances, and also coaching aspiring singers. And then, of course, came the invitation to teach music in Vancouver. Well, I often wonder if Wang To ever regret his decision in light of the great hardship that he went through in Canada in the following years. Nevertheless, he never forsook Cantonese opera as his calling. And he continued to offer instruction, conduct rehearsal, organize performances, all until the late 1990s when he retired. Well, it's a truism that historical figures, the like of Wang To, are oftentimes invisible and inaudible. Their voices and actions are too feeble to be recorded. In the case of Wang To, his marginalities can actually be discerned in multiple overlapping spaces. Well, I'll begin with the obvious, the diaspora space. He's a working class musician, parachuted to Canada, shall we say, in 1961. Well, the exclusion era has come to an end in 1947, but Chinatown remained very much ghetto-like with its residents given really limited opportunity to access mainstream society, didn't really have much opportunity for upward mobility. Wang Tou's marginality can also be observed in the social space based on his occupation. He was surely a master musician, but one associated with a form of plebeian entertainment, an occupation that enjoy only a modicum of esteem and draw a very unstable and modest income in society. Whether it was in his native Guangdong or post-war Hong Kong or the Pacific Rim city of Vancouver. Then there is the performance space. In Cantonese opera, as it is in traditional Chinese opera's multitude of regional genre, it was the actors and the playwrights who enjoy the limelight, whereas musicians are given marginal status. And you can see that actually physically on the traditional stage, the music ensemble was placed on the left, mostly behind the curtain and barely visible to the audience. And last but not least, there's also the marginality in the cultural space within the theatrical discourse pertaining to Chinese opera. What I mean is that Cantonese opera was typically deemed secondary compared to the more quote-unquote elegant and classical theater of Kunju from Jiangnan and the elevated national status of Peking opera from northern China. So the peripheral position of Wang Tou, the musician, the Cantonese opera practitioner, and the Chinese immigrant only make the rich array of sources generated directly or indirectly by him and through him even more spectacular. So in the rest of the time I have, I would like to kind of talk through a few examples of the kind of sources generated by and through Wang Tou. Well, the first example is about documentation of music, musical scores, and notation. As a practicing musician and a music teacher, Wang Tou had made a singular contribution to the documentation of Cantonese opera. And because of his literacy, he started really paying attention to recording music sources in Chinese notation style fairly early in his career in the 1930s. And that is really exceptional for a folk music tradition with its emphasis on the oral transmission of musical knowledge. In other words, you learn the music by observing, by mimicking, and by practicing. You're not hand over a text, right? A notebook of sort to learn the music. And then, of course, Cantonese opera, like most Chinese opera, also emphasize the skill of performing improvisation. So over the long career, Wang Tou had assembled and preserved many musical scores and texts. And his personal holdings appear to be a common knowledge in the Cantonese opera circle, according to the following stories recorded in his self-writing. In 1980, he received a letter from the People's Republic, from an acquaintance in Guangzhou, asking if he might be willing to make copies of his personal holdings to help replenish the music libraries and collection that has suffered immeasurable destruction during the Cultural Revolution. And then there is another inquiry almost 2 decades later, and this time from Hong Kong. At the time, the leading Cantonese opera organizations were spearheading an effort to recover select old-style ritual play that were on the verge of extinction. And they realized one of them, by the name of the Jade Emperor Ascending the Throne, Yu Wang Den Dian, has been last performed in 1958. And no one had a working knowledge of how to stage it properly. Well, they reached out to Wang Tou, who was himself at that performance 40 years ago. And not only that, he kept a copy of the synoptic script, which was shown on the left side here, with the music notation, and then even pictures of the orchestra. And you see him right in the middle on the second row. Well, it was from around this time, the late 1990s, that Wang Tou expanded his effort from preservation to dissemination of his personal library by reprinting items, much to the delight of Cantonese opera fans and professionals. And here on the screen, I share an example of a combined volume of a compendium of kunju and a collection of various arias commonly used in Cantonese opera. And I actually want to draw your attention to the bottom left corner here. Something very interesting. It is the front and back of the badge issued by the organization to commemorate the performance in 1958 of that Yuan Dengdian, the Jade Emperor ascending the throne. So quite memorable, quite a interesting item of historical documentation here. Well, in fact, Wang Tou also launched some projects, writing projects of his own at the same time. He started writing a column for a local newspaper, and later on he assembled those items into a booklet, which he self-published, and then followed by a little title called The Secret History of the Red Bow. And Red Bow, of course, referred to the wooden vessel used to carry artillery troops to travel up and down the Pearl River Delta. And Wang Tou, at his grand old age, belonged to the very last generation with personal knowledge of the Red Bow and the performing practices and the colorful ritual of that era. And then on the left-hand side, he also furnished a recollection of his time in Vancouver. So in a couple of years, Wang Tou had put together a trilogy that spanned a century of time and giving us sketches of Cantonese opera activities on both sides of the Pacific. Well, I want to say a few words about the live writing that he didn't add a word since the late 1940s. As it turned out, he returned to it after 60 years. And it was in 2005, he picked it up again. And in that piece of work, fortunately for me, he decided, first of all, to copy it first, to make the text legible, make it easier on my eyes. And then it was not just a matter of picking up the writing, but he also started organizing his piece of work in a very interesting, one can say, sweeping, long-range, and teleological manner, telling the story through the eyes of a 90-some-years-old man, looking back at his life, what are some of the important moments. And the 1950s was about himself as a music instructor, the 1960s, 70s as a newcomer in Canada, and then the 1980s and beyond as diaspora Chinese revisiting his ancestral land again and again. So a very important, very interesting piece of self-writing. I know my time is almost up, so let me be very, very quick here, if I may. I mentioned earlier that he participated in an exhibition project. And it was really that participation that spurred him on to make a good effort to put his memories in writing, to construct his memory world and share it with others and for the sake of posterity. And that project was really the first time that Wang Tou found himself and his beloved music really enjoying recognition for the first time. And it was that recognition by mainstream society, by a museum, by university, that gave him the confidence to preserve Cantonese opera and to share his knowledge with the outside world. He embraced that road in stride in the last 2 decades of his life. Well, let me make a quick conclusion here. Well, am I casting Wang Tou perhaps in too heroic a fashion? Well, yes and no. I think what is really extraordinary about Wang Tou and the sources he helped generate and preserve in his memory world has to do with the fact that he was otherwise a perfectly ordinary individual, making a living, pursuing occupation, raising a family, relocating time and again, almost always along the margin of society. An individual that seems validated and predestined for the dustbin of history, similar to the vast majority of people like him. And yet, against all odds, almost in the face of his embedded marginality, he had left to us a treasure trove of his memory world. Bearing his footprint, his music making, and telling a story about Cantonese opera, about war and revolutions in South China, and trans-Pacific migrations along the way. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was a really fascinating story. And I can only imagine how you felt when you discovered his life writing and the materials that his family passed on to you. So really a treasure trove. It must have been every researcher's heart sort of must race at hearing that story. I'm sure there will be lots of questions at the end. But we are now moving straight on to the next speaker, Dr. Rui Su. And Rui Su is a senior lecturer in tourism and departmental research and knowledge exchange lead at Middlesex University in London. And Ray's research interests are in cultural tourism, tourist psychology, museology, war study, and urban planning. And she's received several small research fundings from the British Academy, British Council, AHRC, and has led several projects, including Taste of Memory, London Visitor Economy Recovery, Storytelling Festival, and others. Ray's work has been published in the Annals of Tourism Research, in Current Issues in Tourism, the Journal of Heritage Tourism, and also the Journal of Tourism and Cultural Change. So I am handing straight over to you, Rui Su.
Thank you very much. So let me see. I'm trying to share my screen. Can you see my screen? So let me also. Is that okay?
That looks good, yes.
Okay, right. So thank you, Professor Changbai Wang, also invite me to this presentation. And when he sent me the invitation, my starting point is what's the role for my presentation and how I can bring Chinese communities' memories into contemporary discussion of migration in Britain or British society. So maybe the best starting point is start from my project, the Taste of Memory, have been funded by the British Academy last year, or actually 2 years ago. So this project is kind of like a good collaboration with different stakeholders involved, the London Archives, Ming I London Institute, University of Nottingham, and also a couple of the business sponsors. So the project mainly try to explore the sorry. Can you see my screen? Yeah, okay. The whole of the project actually try to explore the collective memories of British Chinese chefs with oral history, and also examine their negotiation with their identities and how they cope with different challenges. So when we get the funding at the first time, we are very excited. We say, yes, we can do something. And then later, when the clock starts, we need to think about, okay, where can we start this project only in 1 year? So I quickly show this is our project timeline. You will see it's quite intensive. We have done one project launch event, 3 skills training workshops, 1 festival, and also 1 exhibition. So our first project event, launch events, we try to invite over 50 community representatives from, we call it GLAM sector, gallery, library, archive, and the museum in London and also South London. So this project, this events also very successful because we also get the very generous support from our business sponsors, Lincoln Key. Also, one of our restaurant managers from the Good Earth. So after the successful launch event, we're trying to say, okay, we need to do some research. We need to looking at the hidden part of the British Chinese community in London. So we have a collaborate with London Archives. Particularly, we have a start with the photo archives on their website. We find most of, or maybe the earliest record about the British Chinese community date back from 1814. But then if you look at most of the photos most of the photos, they're only about the Chinese restaurant, takeaway, fish and chips, mainly like buildings, houses. You can't really see people. So with those memory of the place, normally you can start from the food memories, but this food memory should connect between place and people. And then that's kind of the interaction can help or reframing these migration stories in the Britain. So then when we're looking at this kind of timeline, we realize in the photo archives between 1926 and 1968, there's not lots of photos, there's lots of records. So we find this is maybe one of our gap. Based on that timeline, we continue to explore what kind of the food records we can find out. So one of our good resources we find is from the literature. Between that time, also is the World War II time. The situation very bad, also very challenges for Chinese community living in the UK and also living in London. However, we find most of the literature have also highlight some food stories over there. If you're looking at the first, the top line on the left one, Jiang Yi, which is one of the Chinese scholar, have written The Silent Traveler in London. And then he has all of the series in other like Cambridge, Edinburgh, and other places. So he also tried to record those kind of British culture and the society through some paint and sketch. So you will see the second picture is both Chinese and English scholars enjoyed good food and wine. We have also lots of different scholars from different culture industry and culture areas. They try to record their life in the Britain. So at the same time also reflect their challenges during this wartime. After we find actually lots of food records in the literature, we will see, okay, this kind of the puzzle have been filling across from 18th centuries to the later 20th centuries. But then after that, we're also trying to see, can we compare all of these records in our photo archives and also the present, the development? So what's going on in the future? And then we start this kind of the training, skill training workshops. We try to call for different volunteers from all of the London area. We also have some volunteers from Nottingham and also Yorkshire. Why we invite volunteers to come here? Because we thought the memories of the British Chinese community shouldn't be just stay in the archives as photos, as diaries. We also need to continue those kind of memories through the present or maybe the future generations. So then we invite these volunteers to start with their own stories about the Chinese food. Same time, we also collaborate with Licking Key. We're trying to do this kind of taste samples. And we want to volunteers to tell their understanding or their perceptions about the taste. So then that will help them to collect further memories related to the food. Also, in order to let the volunteers widely include into this project, we're also training them about the exhibition design. So you will see on the right kind of photos, we give them lots of photos about the Chinese community in London, and we ask them to mapping different kind of photos into different exhibitions layout and also collection, also even the exhibition layout route. So from this time, after the 3 skills training workshops, so most volunteers, some of them, they have no idea about British Chinese heritage or this kind of memories. But because of that, we have been kind of like facilitating transfer from outside of the British Chinese community to the inside of British Chinese community, let them to have a more flexibility to explore the memories and also stories. So one of our output is we have did very small mini exhibitions. What we have done is we have collect 23 interviews from British Chinese chefs. Some of them, most of them, they cross 3 generations in London. And then after that, we're trying to, this is all of the process is quite complicated and also really time consuming. You will see we have did a couple of rounds of the decoding. That's very normal qualitative research approach. So after decoding all of this transcription, we find the main ethos, main themes from this project. For example, like we found most of the British Chinese chefs, they're facing a couple of challenges in terms of the language barriers, in terms of the cultural differences, in terms this kind of racism, even in from 1960 or 1970s. So I still remember one of the interviewee has mentioned his fish and chips shop. Lots of children come to his shop, have call him as Chin Chin, which is very bad at that time. So he also asked of help from the policy, but that time he can't do it, and they didn't do anything for them. So he has to avoid those kind of children. So that is kind of the common or maybe historical challenges for lots of the British Chinese community in London. I think also maybe across in the UK. So in order to cope those kind of challenges, lots of the chefs, they have a different coping strategies. So one of the strategy is they try to improve their language. They try to attend different kind of classes to help them to more better understand British culture and British society. So one of them also say that he has came UK and then start the GCSE class. And then once he pass all of the exam, and then that's also helped them to have a very good communication skills with Western customers. And that also gives him a couple of the business opportunities. So you will see across these kind of challenges and also coping strategies, we also have tried to ask them, do you really think your identity in the UK? One of the identity ethos, we think about a group identity. So we have asked them, do you have any community, chef community, particularly for Chinese communities, groups? Unfortunately, we realize, or we also find out, very few chefs have really worried about it, and they say that they only know a couple of friends, but if you think about any chef association to support them, they don't have. So we find maybe a sense of the chef community in UK or probably in London particularly is missing here. And then also, apart from the interviews, we also try to think about the design because we want to visualize or present the chefs this kind of memories through more interesting or maybe more interactive way. Again, designing process is also very complicated because we need to involve different kind of the basic design, the layout, and also detail design. So you will see we have actually the 3 rounds, different design process through coding and also correcting different kind of details. So what will look like that? You will see this is one of our outputs. We have a mapping all of those British Chinese community living histories in London from 1880s to 2024. So eventually we are at the end for the 9th version. So it's really time consuming and also very complicated process. Also, apart from exhibition, we want to invite most of public to engage our exhibition. How we engage them? We try to deliver one festival at London Archives last year. So fortunately, we also collaborate with one of our business sponsor, Deconstructed. They help us to design this most of 10 popular Chinese menus in the UK. And then they also help us to print out 5,000 copies. So it's really generous support for all of the audience to pick up for free. Apart from that, because we want audience really interact with British Chinese communities' memories, so we also design some digital games. When people come to the festival, they will not just read the history, they will also interact with the history. So after the festival, we have get very good respondents and feedback. But one of the improvement is they thought the festival is only for very short time. They want to continue for longer time. So we will consider that one for the next project if we can. So what kind of reflection from this 1 year journey? For all of the issues we want to further explore. One thing is marginalize the community and the voice. Our project only looking at British Chinese community, but London is more like immigrant cities. We have a lot of the communities from other continent like Jamaica or maybe Africa. So their way to represent their collect memories or maybe their voice may be different from British Chinese communities. So maybe in the future, we would like to think about other approach to include their community stories and also raise their voice. Also, the second issue is about the contextualization and the context history. So during the wartime is very difficult for not just the British society, but also for Chinese communities living in the UK. But then how we can represent this context history in like a fairly way, we need to probably have a lot of discussion. Also, when we discover or we will explore or mapping lots of the Chinese restaurants and also this takeaway shops, etc., we find most of restaurants, particularly small size restaurant, have been disappeared. And then if those kind of the memories hasn't been recorded, and then we say like lost, who will be conserve those kind of memories and how we can represent those kind of lost memories in the current generations or maybe for the future generations. So we also want to discover those kind of methodology part approach. The last one is about the interdisciplinary research with archive sector. So the previous speaker, Professor Wing Chong, also used different archives to looking at the musicians' stories. And then I'm wondering in the future, if AI have been widely implemented in the archive sector, can we use this kind of AI technology facilitate us to cataloging different kind of community stories and then represent in the different way, probably not just exhibition, but other digital approach. So maybe this is maybe another opportunities we want to explore in the future. Okay, so thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. That was also fascinating and such an exemplary project. I mean, listening to how you organized it and, you know, the different approaches and all the things that you considered. I mean, that really is and seems to me like an excellent example of how to a model, I guess, that others could follow. So I've really enjoyed this. Thank you. We are moving on to our third speaker. So let me just briefly introduce Dr. Mariana Pinto Leitao Pereira, who is a postdoctoral research associate at the Heritage for Global Challenges Research Center at the University of York. And there she looks at diaspora heritage and knowledge in relation to climate change solutions. Now, Mariana has done a really fascinating PhD project, and she's really just doing the final corrections of it at the University of Cambridge. And her work focused on which she's going to talk today is focused on the ways diaspora communities use cultural heritage to construct and navigate identity in post-displacement settings. Mariana herself is from the Portuguese descendant community of Macau and a board member of the International Council on Monuments and Sites and a member of the Association of Critical Heritage Studies. So over to you, Mariana.
Thank you so much. And it's first of all, thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here and especially follow what were two amazing talks. So thank you so much for everyone who preceded me. I am going to share my screen and I'm going to, okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to start. Let me just put this down. So once again, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. My name is Mariana. Like it was said, I'm at the University of York. I'm funded by the Leverhulme Trust, and today I'm going to share some initial thoughts. I've been working on this for the last year, so if someone has heard me speaking before, you might have heard similar things because I'm trying to understand how seascape to landscape migrations could be considered as a form of diaspora, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. So my presentation is on stories of coming ashore, and it looks at the waterborne communities of Macau in the Pearl River Delta and what happens to the knowledge of the ocean once these communities started living on land. Of course, this is part of a wider project, and I also want to make it very clear in terms of my positionality. I am not from a waterborne community. I'm from the Macanese community of Macau in China. And like I said, this is still in its incipient stage. And one thing that is important is that I am now going for fieldwork in May. So I have not yet interviewed anyone. And so all of these ideas, can change quite drastically once I start my, my fieldwork. Now, in this presentation, I will start by outlining my theoretical positioning within heritage studies, particularly my focus on movement and displacement. And then I will look into the theoretical framework. I will introduce deltas as a space to think. And of course, the case study. Additionally, I am going to argue that the waterborne communities can be considered a case of internal diaspora because they sustain and transform their water-related heritage and identities on land. I will also frame the experiences of these communities within the broader discussions on migration and marginality and resilience. Now, heritage and heritage studies is quite an emerging discipline, and it refers to the ways we give meaning, we remember, we experience, and we use the past in the present. And so my research aims to understand how migration and movement shape heritage. And I'm particularly interested in how migrations between different geographical features, so in this case, between waterscapes to landscapes, how these influence the way we see the past and we think of the future. Of course, when I talk about diaspora, diaspora refers to dispersed groups of people who sustain and share kinship bonds and memories related to past shared places of origin and to personal or ancestral migration experiences. Importantly, diaspora often implies movement that has already occurred. But this movement continues to influence your identity and your cultural practices. So in my project, I'm working a little bit with this idea. Of course, we know there are internal diasporas, but can we consider the movement between land and sea or sea and land as a form of diaspora? I think we could. We know that within the same nation state, this type of displacement can create experiences that are very similar to crossing international borders. And so this perspective allows us also to explore how communities maintain connections to their water-based origins and reconstruct their heritage in new environments. So what I'm doing is to use heritage as a lens to understand how knowledge of the geographies we carry with us, so the geographies we don't no longer inhabit, how do they persist and adapt in the places where we move to? And additionally, I also seek to understand how migration between different geographical features shapes the way we express heritage, we sustain it, and we conceptualize it. Now, within the study of relationships between people and bodies of water, recent scholarship has seen the rise of blue humanities, maritime anthropologies, critical ocean studies, blue cultural studies, amongst many other topics and disciplines. We are talking about liquid geographies and the temporalities that emerge from centering water. And from this perspective, there are two theoretical approaches that I think offer an interesting lens to study sea-to-land migrations. The first one is wet and more than wet ontologies by Peters and Steinberg, and it embraces a world of flows, of connections, of liquidities and transformations. And it recognizes the ocean as a dynamic relational geography that extends beyond the boundaries of what is conventionally considered, the ocean or land. Wet ontologies really highlights the ocean's material and phenomenological distinctiveness, suggesting that water-based experiences can challenge and reconfigure dominant land-based understandings of heritage. And the concept emphasizes how the ocean generates, for example, winds, it transports smells, it influences landscapes far beyond its immediate boundaries. And when people move, they carry their water with them, right? So by focusing on how bodies of water interact with land, wet ontologies really provides a framework for understanding how seascape to landscape migrations reshape heritage practices. And I think this approach is essential to recognize the distinctiveness of water-based cultural memory and how it persists even after the communities are displaced to land. Okay. So the second theoretical approach is called tidaletics. It's the name of an exhibition that was done under the, under this topic in 2017, and it offers another lens for understanding the complex relationships between land and sea. So I'm going to read. Tidaletics is about being unbound by land-based modes of thinking and living. It is about the rhythmic fluidity of water and the incessant swelling and receding of tides. So it merges the anchored with the itinerant and moves back and forth between being waterborne and touching land. It allows us to think of hybridity, cross-cultural syncretism, incompleteness, and fragmentation. And the influence of the ocean is not restricted to the waters and aquatic beings. It affects land and terrestrial life just as much. So tidaletics focuses on these rhythmic fluidities, hybridities, and the continuous interplay between water and land. And it allows us to highlight how identities, memories, and practices can flow and adapt across fluid geographies. So for the boat dwellers of Macau, their heritage exists in the shifting spaces where these watery environments meet. And tidaletics, I think, also provides a framework for understanding how their people's cultural practices really adapt and persist despite displacement. Now, in the study of Macau's waterborne communities, I'm looking specifically at one type of wet region, so a delta, namely the Pearl River Delta. And deltas are wetlands, and so they are semi-aquatic ecosystems, and they're fascinating. They form as rivers empty their water and their sediment into another body of water, like an ocean or lake or another river. And so in doing that, they bring the land into the water. And deltas are incredible ecosystems where both water and land really merge into each other in multiple directions and ways. And I think there's an interesting parallel in which the boat dweller communities bring their water to land. So we have an inverse movement when they migrate. And I think we can conceptualize something interesting of people and water feeding into each other's in their intersection with land. And so this is a photo of the Pearl River Delta, the region I'm studying in the southeast coast of China. So, of course, the heritage of boat dwellers, shaped by their engagement with aquatic environments, is often misunderstood. and marginalized within conventional land-based frameworks. So the notion of marginalization here refers to how certain communities are pushed to the periphery of mainstream society, sometimes lacking recognition and resources. So I'm particularly interested in the property of exteriority in this notion of marginalization. And exteriority means to exist outside dominant systems and sometimes beyond societal protections. And so, as Hall suggests, marginalization produces both vulnerabilities and resilience. And so I'm interested in how the boat dwellers sustain their heritage, which is not defined by these rigid land-based structures, but it's fluid. It adapts to intersections between land and water. So if we recenter their voices, we have to also acknowledge water as central, not as peripheral, and as central medium for cultural production and memory. And so this approach, of course, challenges static heritage frameworks, which are still very much dominant, and really highlights the creative resilience of these communities. Now, like I said, I'm going for fieldwork in May to conduct interviews. My research involves oral histories, a lot of archival research, and participant observation. And again, as a Macanese, so from the Portuguese descendant community of Macau, I am an outsider looking at a community that has been living side by side with us, but not being the same. And so, of course, my perspective will inform the study. There are several different groups of boat dwellers alongside the coasts of China, namely along Fujian and Hainan, northern Foshan, Hong Kong, and Macau. Now, Macau's boat-dwelling communities were highly visible along the Pearl River Delta until the late 19th century, and many people from my family and from other families remember seeing them. In 1988, a researcher from the Maritime Museum in Macau, Rui Peixoto, he estimated that there were around 10,000 people that were waterborne out of 426,000 inhabitants in Macau. So it's a small minority. Most were dedicated to fishing and transportation of people and of goods. In Hong Kong at the time, the estimates were 150,000 waterborne people. So the community was a bit larger, and around 3 million in all of Guangdong. We're not sure nowadays how many still see themselves as waterborne. And so that's one of the things I would love to find out. Now, of course, the Pearl River Delta is highly urbanized and has undergone drastic and very quick changes in the past decade. So in 2022, the 9 largest cities of the Pearl River Delta had a combined population of 86 million people. So this is very, very urbanized. And what these maps show is how much the Delta has been transformed because of land reclamations, loss of flow of sediment. So you can see the Delta on the picture on the left-hand side, you can see the flow of sediments, and on the right, it's almost not there anymore. So this, of course, impacts people's livelihoods and perceptions of what a delta is. Of course, it's not just the Pearl River Delta. The entire coastline of China and in this area of Asia is extremely busy. And so these are just maps showing how the fishing activity is alongside the coast. And so these are very busy waters. Now, since the late 20th century, different factors like urban expansion, restricted access to waterways, pollution, overfishing, and sociopolitical pressures have pushed many of the waterborne communities to resettle on land. And the process is locally known as the coming ashore. Almost like it's also meaning leaving the boat. Now, there are some misconceptions or some associations related with this notion of leaving the boat or coming ashore. And it's still related with renouncing evil for good. So the idea that if you leave the water and come to land, you're doing something good, which is a bit of a sedentarist bias, but I would love to know what the community thinks, of course. Now, this transition has resulted in the gradual loss of water-based knowledge, including fishing techniques, navigation skills, and an ecological understanding of water-related weather and tropical storms. But some practices have persisted and they have adapted, often in invisible or unrecognized ways. So I'm going to very briefly talk about just one case that is much more complex than what I'm going to show, but it's the Drunken Dragon Festival in Macau, and it provides a fascinating example of how stories of water and relationships to water continue to be manifested on land. Now, the Drunken Dragon Festival originates in Zhongshan, actually, and it was introduced in Macau in the 19th century, so already movement of people bringing their own festivities to a different place. There are records that point to the existing of this festivity dating back to the 10th century, so this is a very, very long relationship to water. Originally, it seems the celebration was dedicated to the goddess Ama, which is the main or one of the main water deities, protector of the boat dwellers and the fishermen. And one of the oldest temples in Macau is dedicated to the goddess Ama. Now, the Drunken Dragon marks the beginning of a period of pause in the fishing industry and is organized by fishmongers in Macau. The festival, above all, is rooted in water-based practices that have been recontextualized to fit on land. Now, the fishmongers are those who sell fish on land. They are not necessarily part of the waterborne community, but historically, they were the ones on land who had the license to buy and sell the fish from the boat dwellers. And so I'm using the festival to try and reach the community. I want to know where they are and whether this festival means anything to them or whether this is a separate thing. So I'm just using it as a space. But when I started looking at the festival, it also allows us to understand how stories of water and the intersections between land and water actually manifest in these festivals. So during the festival, which coincides with the celebrations of the birth of Buddha, participants carry a wooden dragon head and the body of the dragon throughout various parts of the city to symbolize prosperity and, of course, as a blessing for the safety of the fishing community. It was inscribed on China's National Intangible Cultural Heritage List in 2011. And Macau also has it in its own list. Now, by examining the festival's myths and performances, we can see how water-based heritage adapts to land while retaining some of the connections to the seafaring context. And so I'm just going to share 4 origin myths, and I'm going to emphasize how relationship to water is talked about quite differently, but it's still there, it's still present. And I think there's much more underlying this festival, and I'll explain a little bit once we go through the origin story. So these are different origin stories that are present online that other researchers have shared. And so, of course, this research is still much based on what other scholars have been able to find out. And I'm very thankful for that. So this is the first one. And so how did the Drunken Dragon Festival started? First, a group of fishermen encountered a plague-infected python in the sea, which they mistook for a dragon. They killed the python and brought it ashore, where they cut it into pieces and distributed it among themselves. However, they soon realized that they had eaten poisonous meat and they started to feel sick and dizzy. And in order to save themselves, they drank a lot of wine mixed with herbs, and they began to dance wildly with the wooden head and tail of the python, pretending that it was still alive. Miraculously, they survived the ordeal, and they attributed their recovery to the power of the drunken dragon. So I've highlighted in yellow and in orange or brown these key terms that will continue to pop up in many of these stories of how these festivals originated. The notion of health, water related with health, with plague is continuous. The transformation of the snake into, or the python into a dragon and dragon into a python is also something very important. And then this idea of bringing it ashore, right? The idea of coming to land, it's also quite interesting. And again, drinking the water leads to recovery and leads to healing. Now, the second story comes with a bit more information. So its origins can be traced to the Qing dynasty when a group of villagers, so it's no longer fishermen, it's villagers, met with an incurable plague. The villagers staged a procession with the statue of Buddha to ask the gods for aid. A python appeared and interrupted the procession, but a drunken monk cut up the snake, danced, and threw it into the river. The python's blood turned the sea red, and the snake flew into the sky, causing the villagers to believe that the python was actually a dragon sent from heaven. Then they ate the red seagrass, which cured their illness. So I think here
other really important points come up. First of all is now we have the return into the river. So whereas the other origin story talks about coming ashore, this talks about going back to water. And it talks about the snake flowing into the sky. So I wonder if this is about the hydrological cycle of the water. And it talks about, like how water and rain and the river delta is all associated. It's the same water. So I'm very interested in trying to understand if this is true or not. And then the third origin story is related with, a dragon was struck dead by a man who had been given courage by alcohol. I still don't really know what the relationship to alcohol is, but I would love to find out. So the beast lunged from a river at villagers who were pleading to a statue of Buddha to be cured of a great plague, again, the disease and the relationship to Buddha. On drinking the river water reddened with the dragon's blood, the villagers found themselves cured of the disease. So, of course, I wonder here if the dragon also represents the old religions before Buddhism. And Buddhism then coming and being introduced in China between 206 BCE and 220 BCE. So, or BC, sorry. So I wonder if what the dragon here also means and if it's associated with religion before Buddhism. And then, of course, the fourth origin story, again, it is said long time ago, Macau had a pestilence. The villagers asked the Buddha for help and they decided to invite and carry the Buddha to the village on the way back home at the side of the river. So these are texts that are copy-pasted from the versions that people shared. So forgives any mistakes that are here. On the way back home at the side of the river, a boa snake jumps out from forest. Suddenly, the villagers fought the boa and the snake was killed. The blood of the snake flowed into the river, and the water in the river cured the disease in the villages. And again, the embodiment of the dragon and dancing the drunken dragon to commemorate this. So this shows a different aspect. It shows the in and out of the river, and it breaks the boundaries of inside and outside. And so I'm interested in these myths and what they might tell us about movement of people, movement of religion, and movement of ontologies, water-based ontologies. Now, festivals such as the Drunken Dragon, and I only have 2 more slides left, so I'm finishing. Festivals such as the Drunken Dragon really become counterspaces, right? Sites of radical possibility where different geographies can manifest. And festivals on their own, of course, they suspend everyday life and they allow people to perform identity and process personal memories and collective memories they wouldn't outside the festival be allowed to do. So what we have here is the worshipping of serpentine water beings and deities, which probably reflects human environmental relations and the value of water. And I really want to know if these narratives are associated with the hydrological water cycle, what the relations between the snake and the dragon are, and what does it say about our way of living in water. And I think here we can start to reframe, of course, the experience of Macau's boat dwellers as an internal diaspora, precisely because this displacement out of water into land really changes the way you see yourself. And it really requires a reorientation of cultural and social reorientation. And of course, although the lifestyle and practices related to the ocean are a bit marginalized, what is interesting is that these festivals are recognized as intangible heritage. So there is a selective recognition of what is seen as heritage and what is seen as not heritage, particularly with the opening up of the river delta in relation to the Maritime Silk Road and China's Belt and Road Initiative. I think there's some interesting explorations here to do in terms of what does water mean and where does it sit. And I think understanding internal diaspora in relation to marginality allows us to question whose heritage is valued and whose heritage is excluded, and how do heritage-making processes respond to displacement. And so I really would like to broaden the notion of heritage with this study and really refocus not land-based frameworks, but fluid frameworks as a way to talk about heritage. And I'm hoping that recentering the voices of boat dwellers can help us appreciate how displaced communities sustain their identities and knowledge of the sea even after they move. So how we all have knowledge of our geographies after we all moved. And that's a little bit what I want to explore. And thank you so much. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Mariana. That was, again, completely different and yet absolutely fascinating and really beautiful imagery as well. So I've got lots of questions after all of these, and I'm really grateful to sort of to listen to something that's quite far away from my own research, but it's just goes to show how inspiring things from outside one's own immediate field can be. So thank you for this. I'm going to hand over to Cangbei, who will sort of make more learned commentary as a real expert in the field. So over to you, Cangbei.
Okay, thank you. Good for sharing, and thank you very much for the speakers for accepting our invitation. It's great to see you again, Mariana, although it's online. And Professor Wing Chen just got to London yesterday, and still have jet lag. And thank you very much for joining us today. And welcome to London, welcome to University of Westminster. And I really enjoy all the presentations. Thank you for sharing with us this fascinating original research about diaspora heritage. It's very different, as you can see. Each of the paper targeting on a specific community, either the musicians, Cantonese opera practitioners in Canada, or the Chinese chef in Britain, or the boat dwellers in Macau. So very different social, cultural, geographic context. But however, there are a lot of share a lot of similarity and shared interest, particularly give the visibility to Chinese diasporas who are very often underrepresented and voiceless in different ways. I think the beauty of this panel discussion is we have a dialogue between different disciplines. As a historian, Wing Chen, did a brilliant job to discover and decipher, archives, untapped archives, not from library, not from university, but from the private collection of individuals, which is really valuable, such as the musical scores and memoirs, personal letters, documents produced by Wang Tao. It's very. I think the discovery and sharing these documents itself is a great contribution to the study of Chinese diasporas. And Su Rui, her research is more participatory research. It's very interdisciplinary. It's a participatory research involved. I know Su Rui did and her team worked tirelessly to go to kitchens, to make friends with Chinese chefs, to interview them, to collect stories, and give voices to the British chefs who, most of the time they are invisible. They're working behind the scenes. I think it's a really amazing job to, help us to enrich our understanding of the British Chinese communities. And also, Mariana, I think your research is more, probably ethnographic because you're involved. I know you will go into the fieldwork soon. So I think it will involve, participant observations, getting involved the life of the boat people. And in addition to the research of archives, probably also involved life story interviews, right? So, so what we see here is scholars from different perspectives, different backgrounds come together, use different methodologies, working together to unveil the hidden heritage of Chinese diaspora, to give voices to untold stories. So all of you did a brilliant job. And the second commonality I think is all of you have talked about the idea of marginality, the marginality. So you recognize that migrants experience, challenges, exclusion, discrimination, but also at the same time, I think all the papers have, the idea of marginality not as something always associated with negative, isolation or loss, but actually marginality can be something positive. It's a partition power as as a resources of creativity, resilience, on the side of making ethnic, racial, cultural differences, also as a site of resistance, contesting authority and hegemonies. I think that comes very, very strongly from all your research. And I think the agency of migrants probably best illustrated by the musician Wang Tao. Despite his non-elite working class status, Wang Tao, with dignity and self-cultural awareness, did a great job, collecting not only his own life journey, but also documentation, recording the opera tradition of Cantonese opera, the cultural heritage, and did a great job in terms of how to maintain continuation and transmission of this heritage to the next generation and to wider audiences, right? So without this agency, probably a lot of this heritage has been lost, right? So this gives a good example of the agency. No matter how marginal they are considered to be, actually they are not just play a passive role. They are engaging, they are contributing with dignity, right, and pride. Yeah. And the research reminded me of the useful distinction made by during my research of the British Chinese in London. They put on the annual celebration of Chinese New Year, and in Trafalgar Square, so play a very agentive role to turn diasporic heritage into the heritage of the local, of the global London, and the distinction made by Bennett between capsulated marginal and constructive marginal. Capsulated marginal referring to migrant like victims of marginality who are detached, who cannot fulfill the needs of both the host country and home countries. The helpless is a victim, but constructive agency, a marginal referring to migrants benefit from this in-betweenness, give them a sense of freedom and flexibility to make use of this, marginality to create, space for imagination, to identity construction, placemaking. So I think all of your research demonstrated very nicely, how migrants make use of this constructive marginality to proactively engage with identity construction and contributing to a more diverse, inclusive society. And so that's what another point that I think all of you have talked about is the contribution, just the contribution, as Mariana talked about, how do we understand heritage differently? Heritage most of the time has been definition and making heritage have been dominated by nationalist, nation state, even colonialist discourse, a power and power structures. And the life experience, culture, and heritage of migrants, diaspora, has been devalued, considered not valuable, like rubbish, or completely excluded from the national heritage discourses. I think all the research have challenged this by put forward offering alternative as understanding of heritage. The heritage is a bottom up and a transnational diasporic perspective and maritime perspective to heritage making, right? So we should have a dialogue with the Stuart Hall more than 20 years ago, asked the question, whose heritage, whose heritage? And that was in 1990s. I don't think has changed much in the past two decades. We still ask the same question, right? And Stuart Hall calling for we rewrite the outside to the inside, the margin into the center. So this is still mission unfinished. So we're still working together to call for this, the attention to the value of diasporic heritage. And also find interesting is that your research talk about probably what is called intangible heritage, right? It's like a music performance, and also food, and the lifestyle, waterborne lifestyle, and water, and water landscape and waterscape. So these are I think it's all involved the so heritage is not static and fixed, right? It's involved a situated, multi-dimensional sensory experience. It involved, corporate engagement with things through not only sight or touch, but actually like food, smiling, taste, smell, taste, music, sound, soundscape, foodscape, and waterscape, right? And its feelings and its touching, it's involved the discussion and feeling of emotions, desires, which is well beyond the heritage that is defined by the physicality or monumentality of heritage only, which is in the European discourse, is all about the monumentality associated national discourses. So I think your research offering a very fresh, embodied perspective to the understanding of heritage. And all the heritage you talk about, like food and the music, is not attached to any specific, the geographical territory. I think it's made in between, made in the process of circulation. That's what made Cantonese opera. That what made Chinese food. And it's quite. So we need to move away from this, geographical national framework to look at how heritage are stretched, remixed, blended, remade in the process of circulation, right? In the process of remaking. I think, although I can, based on my understanding, all your research talk about this fluidity, hybridity, and in-betweenness from different perspectives. Of course, you also mentioned the importance of body. And no matter musician, play a musical instrument, perform is a body. Body is a very central state, and the sailing, the boat people, and also of course British chef cooking, is all involved body embodiment, body movement, and in the very mundane routine repetition, is everyday practices. So draw all attention to the seemingly meaningless but actually very important routine everyday process, which play a big role in the making and feeling and sharing heritage through the making, and consumption and the transmission of things. And things became the very vehicle through which migrants' identities, emotions are articulated, extended, right? So it's my sharing with my comments and my observation of all the papers. I have two questions I want to ask all of you. So one is so if you can respond quickly. So one is you talk about the taste of memory and the memory of the Wang Tao about his life, and the memory of the boat people about the life and white ontology and the lifestyle. So yeah, of course, my memory is very important related to heritage making, but sometimes is the remembering, forgetting are the two sides of the same coin, right? So sometimes remembering to forget is the same as important actually forgetting to remember. So my question is, in your research, the Wang Tao and and I know he did a great job recollecting his life journey and British chef and the white boat people, but what they decided choose to forget, or what are the things they decide to discard in order to move forward, and this is a decision-making process, right? And why and how. So this is the first question. And the second question is, when we talk about the diaspora, we understand marginality is talking in relation to the center. But with the center is always, most of the time, is thinking about the host country, the whole society, like Canada, like UK, or internal diaspora to the land. But actually, diaspora are the marginal subject on the world, on the periphery of both the home country and host countries. So somehow, in a sense, they are double marginal subject. So how does diaspora engage with not only one center, but two centers, how they engage with this situation, dilemma, or opportunity of a double marginality in terms of creative space for themselves, identity and empowerment. I also prepared some questions to each of the speakers separately, but maybe you can share your views on these two, general questions first. Yeah.
Who would like to go first?
Should I?
Yes, sure.
This is Wing Chun here. Well, good question, great observation. And first of all, let me congratulate my two fellow panelists. I mean, just fascinating subject, both of you. And I learned so much about your area of research, and also have this opportunity of dialoguing and thinking about commonality, how I will intersect. And really, it's just a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for me. In response to Chang Bai's questions, the first one about memory and the remembering and the forgetting. I think what I observed in the life writing of Wang To is exactly that process. As I mentioned very quickly towards the end of my talk, when I touch on that, the renewal of his writing, right, towards the end of the last 10 years of his life, when he looked back, I mean, what did he choose to write about, right? Compared to the first iteration of his writing when he was young, at that time it was very detail oriented, actually pretty was quite dramatized by the war experience. So we talk about a lot about the destruction he observed, some of the near-death experience he personally encountered. And yet, I mean, moving to the second half, the second iteration, when he wrote his life history at the age of 90, he singled out a couple of dominant themes that to him speak to his personal kind of stories, right? And what he remembered about the past 50 years of his life is about, I mean, making Cantonese opera, I mean, teaching, right? Himself being mentoring the next generation and passing on the torch, so to speak. And so those, it's actually very interesting because in that section of his writing, he recorded each and every name of his students, several dozen of them in the 50s. And actually, a lot of those names are, for those of us who are familiar with the contemporary Cantonese opera scene, we recognize quite a few of them as movers and shakers by the end of the century. And I think what is so meaningful for Wang To at that point in looking down the names is because collectively, they kind of also speak to his, shall we say, musical immortality, right? That's his legacy. It's the embodiment of his life's work. And so he chose to remember that particular theme. And of course, along the way, as Chang Bai so rightfully recognized, there are things he forgot. There are things that he chose to sideline. There are things that he chose not to recall, perhaps particularly for that occasion. And a quick response on the question about double marginalities. And as I mentioned in my talk, I think Wang To actually exhibit multiple marginality, right? It's in between the two, the Canadian hosts and China, but also within his realm of musicianship. There are all kinds of discourse we need to navigate. The domination of Peking opera or Kunju, right, in the theatrical discourse, and how does someone who practices Cantonese opera, a quote-unquote perhaps lesser theatrical tradition, how to articulate that position, how to assert its agency. And I think that is in itself a very interesting process of negotiation. So I'll stop here.
Great. Raise to Mariana, who wants to come in.
Probably I can continue.
Sure.
So I think also response to Songbai's first question about the relationship between remembering and forgetting. I think we may need to think about two different kind of approaches. So top-down approaches and bottom-up approaches. So what I mean is from top-down, we know, for example, like public sector, like the authority archive centers, they used to collect the memory of communities, memories, stories from we call colonize, those kind of approach. So recent decades, they have a new suggestion they call the decolonizing approach to say that public archive, those kind of dominant archive centers, they should include more or marginalized communities' voice into their collections. So maybe in the future, we also need to welcome more this kind of decolonized approaches from the public sectors. And then also from the bottom-up approach, which I thought oral histories can be another kind of the approach, maybe include more stories into the future memory collections. So let's say if the pictures or maybe text, diaries, all of these stories by written, they have some difficulties to pass on. And then can we introduce this voice or oral stories maybe can benefit for archives or marginalized community stories from different perspectives rather than only written this kind of materials. Also, in terms of the oral history, because we know now digital archive have been widely applied into memories collections. So maybe we need to think about how we can integrate digital to collect memory, represent memory. But that time we also need to think about some issues, for example, like authenticity. Later, who will own those digital copyright, those issues? So I think, yeah, maybe these two different approaches can let us to think about a relationship between forgetting and also remembering. Also, the double marginalized. This is also happened when we did the taste memory project. So lots of chefs, they say that I want to back to China, but I can't. And then I want to stay here for my rest of life to retire, but I can't. So they also feel struggling based on my interviewees. I don't know the answers, to be honest, but I also would like to see how they negotiate those kind of the conflicts or maybe confusion probably during this double marginalized process. I don't know the answer, sorry.
Great, very interesting, especially the point about the oral history, the digital archives, or the oral archives, and who owns it and who is allowed to do what with it in the future. So that's an interesting question. Mariana.
No, and thank you so much. And thank you, Songbay, for sharing your thoughts also about, the presentations and how we all align together. And I think there were some very important points already raised here. And so regarding the first comment you've made, I do think we are looking at processes, right? So the making of memory, the forgetting, it's all part of a process. And I think we need to start asking deep questions about the methodologies we use and the questions we ask, because the point is we need to bring visibility to how people decide to sustain connections, to remember certain things, and of course they decide to let go of certain things, and that's completely fine. We're not trying to safeguard everything. That's not the point. I think the point is really to show how we react in different spaces, but also how sometimes things we believe were forgotten manifest itself in ways that we were not expecting in a completely different setting. And so the way we remember things materializes itself in different ways, and the same way when we forget things, it also materializes itself in ways we perhaps were not expecting. So I think it's about also asking different questions and using different methodologies. And I really think I agree with what was said, that personal stories is such a rich and important way of bringing out this diversity of how things are done. And I think, of course, going into the double marginality, people do struggle, and they struggle a lot with the nation state framework, right? We are seen to fit into boxes that none of us really actually fit. And I think it's about showing how diverse things can be and how it is okay to have that diversity. And I think in terms of diasporas especially, I would even say it's not just about two spaces, right? It's about multiple centers that sometimes become peripheries in other contexts and become centers again. It's about spaces of transition. It's about different temporalities, right? And I think most importantly, again, is what are the methods and the questions we are asking? Because like it was said, when it comes, for example, with the new digital spaces, whose memories are going to be uploaded online, for example, whose handwritten notes are going to be safeguarded is a big question, but also who decides to create the codes that will go through the archives. Because if certain words are not included, those memories are going to be excluded, those voices are excluded. So who's deciding which words, which keywords are going to be the framework for the archives we're creating now? I think these are important questions as well. And so I think really, really delving into the methodologies we're using and the questions we're asking is a huge step for us, and it's an important space for us to change things and be a little bit rebellious. So thank you.
Great. Sorry, there was a very, very loud motorbike just going past my window. I know, Tangbai, you've prepared more questions, and I actually also have a few questions.
Yeah, I'm happy to give the time to
But
you.
maybe we should ask the audience if there are questions in the
Mm.
audience in the first instance. So there is nothing as far as I can see in the chat right now, but are there, giving a little bit of space to the audience to articulate a question, maybe just unmute yourselves if you have a question. Can be stressful to find the raise hands function in Zoom.
I have a very quick one.
Yep, that's okay. It doesn't have to be very quick, but go on.
Thank you very much. So I have a question to Ray. Probably because of time limited, you have mentioned a lot on how British Chinese should negotiate their own identities. You mentioned they try their best to improve their English language ability, and also integrate into local community and society. So I was wondering, in the process of assimilation and integration to British society in their everyday life and in their everyday business, did their identities were changed or reshaped by the everyday life practices? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dong Wei. That's a very good question. Actually, before we start the interview, all of the chefs, we thought because they really want to integrate in the British society, they are also face lots of struggling. And then maybe they can keep their identity forever. They are like, say, we are the Chinese forever. And then later, because their whole life cycle sometimes also changed, because some of the chefs, they also marry local wives. And then they worry about not themselves, but their next generation's identity. For example, like their children, most of them have to say they are not, they can't speak Chinese at all. So this is another kind of the worry for chefs themselves, but also for our researcher to think about who will continue those kind of chef memories later and who will keep their identities later. So that's for the current generation and the next generation. But we also interview some chefs who have run this restaurant business for over 4 generations in London. They were quite successful so far. But the current owner also very worried about it is his dad is OBE, so it's very like this kind of well-known celebrities chefs, and then his dad also have a lot of memories, lots of stories have been published, lots of books, lots of documentary. And then he thought, okay, we really represent authentic Chinese food. And then that's as himself and really represent as Chinese. However, later, because the business expanded a lot, so now he has lots of branches in London. And then because market have been changed, so you can't really provide so many purely authentic Chinese food as it is. So in order to meet lots of local market demands, some menu have been changed. So we call it the infusion food. So do you think that will be still kept his original identity as Chinese? He also questioned, and probably not, because he was born in Britain. And then his children also was born in Britain. He can't really speak very well Chinese. I think at that time, because of this transgenerational change, their identity also a little bit changed. So far, he didn't think he is really Chinese, but his business can represent partially Chinese cultural heritage, particularly food cultural heritage. So I don't know whether I answer your question or not, but I think the transgenerational change and really affect their identity thinking, and also really affect their sense of the identity as individually and also as the community.
Yeah, thanks very much. And in this case, I would like to add a very quick follow-up. So it's also back to Professor Chang Baiwang mentioned about forgetting and remembering. So you talk about they forget their language, probably they change their cooking style to meet the needs of local market. What are the key identity markers of a British Chinese, do you think you find from your research is very important for them to represent their own identity as either British or Chinese?
So when we did lots of these interviews, I also worry about another forgetting things. It's not just about language, it's about the menu. So lots of the recipe and the menus, we thought they should be our culture, Chinese culture heritage. We should continue and represent for the current generation, maybe for the future generation. However, I talked to a couple of the business owners. They say that unfortunately we can't really use the old recipe because lots of the ingredients that time is very old. So now probably not really fitting the current generation taste. So they have to forget, kind of like forget this recipe, but they only post all of the recipe as in the archive, their own family archive. So do you think we post this archive recipe in the archive as the way for remembering or just forgetting? That's the one debate we have. So what we kind of like how they still keep their identity either as the British and Chinese. I think we need to have a lot of the collective effort, not only for individual restaurants, individual scholars, individual organization. We need to have all of the collective effort together. Otherwise, it's very difficult to decide which identity belongs to which.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
So we've got another question in the chat, but I just wanted to come in and just thought that, you know, I wonder whether, you know, British and Chinese, if they are really, you know, is this a wrong equivalence? One is a national identity, the other is a cultural identity, an ethnic identity. I mean, I think there is so much more variation, of course, there. I think there is. Maybe it's. I know it's. I think it makes it too simple, but I think also this there seems to be quite a lot of anguish to you know to determine what is precisely Chinese, and I think that in itself is it seems to me to be an interesting phenomenon about the Chinese diaspora. Surely partly because of the of what other people project onto this onto Chinese diaspora as a very undifferentiated view and lack of knowledge of the range of diversity, of course, among Chinese diasporas and Chinese languages and Chinese cultures. Because quite a lot of what I hear, I myself am an immigrant in this country, and my children are born here. They don't look different to the British, I guess, what is even the British identity, but a lot of the questions relating to language of the next generation and now the third generation here, and food and authenticity. I mean, they sound very familiar also to me. So those are so many questions that come up, I guess, in life stories when you move, different people on the move. But in any case, we've got a question for you specifically, Professor Ng, by Wong Yue-Heng, who wants to know how you, who is finishing a monograph on diasporic Cantonese painters, and wants to know how you would relate the biography of Master Wang with the larger diasporic community in Canada.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Yue-Heng. But if I may, before I address the question you posed, I want to kind of really chime in on these conversations about food, about identity, because it's so fascinating. What I'm particularly curious is about this. When we think about Chinese food, whether it is in China or in the larger Chinese world, in the diasporic world, and in the global food market, we don't usually just think about Chinese cuisine, right? We tend to regionalize it and attach label the Shanghai, Sichuan, Hunnanese. Well, even my students back in Texas, they know about these regional cuisines, right? And so I'm wondering, in the process here that we are observing, we're seeing, as you elucidate in the UK context, where are the regional labels, right? Are they also lost over time? Because we tend to think, maybe that's too simplistic, but we tend to think that earlier Chinese food in the European context tend to be Cantonese, right? Because associated with the migration flow and the history of settlement, so on and so forth. And yet, by the latter part of the 20th century, it really kind of opened up, become multiple, right? Taking in all these different regional styles of cooking. So are we talking about at this time, this kind of de-regionalization of Chinese food, taking on a more national label, make it or cultural label, making it Chinese? So that's a question that we can further discuss. To chime in here, go back to Wang Yue-Heng's question, fascinating question. How does the biography of Master Wang relate to the larger diasporic community in Canada? Well, I think the way I'm looking at it is we really opened up a conversation about how we think about Chinese Canadian identity. Because for the longest time, going back to the theme of our panel, marginality. Now, Chinese experience, Chinese history in the context of Chinese migration history in Canada has been pretty much forgotten, overlooked, obscured, erased by the dominant nation-based discourse in Canadian history. And yet, writing about the history of an uncelebrated figure, a hidden voice of Master Wang, was a way of reclaiming the sense of belonging. That indeed, Chinese were here for the past 100 years, and their voices need to be heard, and within that Canadian context. And yet, at the same time, I think I love how Mariana finished her talk when she invoked the notion, let's be rebellious, right? And I think that's what writing history along the margin allow us to really question a lot of the paradigm. While claiming to be Chinese Canadian, that sense of diasporic belonging also had a very strong, provocative, if you will, transnational element, right? While we're here, but we're also not leaving China behind, right? There's this element of Cantonese-ness, there's this element of cultural identity that can be brought in from, for the lack of a better word, homeland, or the place where the family you once belonged. And so this kind of here and there, this kind of long-distance negotiation, bicultural or multicultural remaking and remixing of identity become very, very pronounced. And so I think writing the biography of Wong To really allowed me to kind of think about the questions of Chinese Canadian identity making in that process.
I'm very conscious of time. We've nearly come up to a full 2 hours. We have one more question also for Ray on how you position the business sponsor in the design of the project. But I don't know whether it is possible to pick that up directly, or whether is that quite a quick response that you can give to this, Ray?
Position of the business sponsor. So actually the business sponsor starts the collaboration or involve this project from the beginning. So they have been invited to have a do this kind of we call it the project meeting. So every time if we want to collaborate with London Archive to design this kind of taste sessions, we invite them to design the samples. And because Lee they have so many different source samples, we can't just say randomly, yeah, give us 10, no way. So they need to think about how different kind of the sources will relate to what kind of activities and what kind of impact this project can achieve. So later, particularly for the festival part, they really help us to design all of the food menus, which we can ask all of the audience to pick up for free. And then so from the whole of the process, from the beginning to the end, we have to involve our project partners from every stages. Hopefully I answered the questions.
Great. So I want to, sadly, I think we do need to draw to a close, but it was really fascinating, a fascinating panel. I want to say thank you very, very much to all three speakers. And of course, thank you so much, Cangbei, for bringing them together and treating us to such an interesting afternoon. I hope the conversations continue in different spaces, and I look forward to seeing you all hopefully in person, at conferences, or maybe at another event that we are organizing in the future, and wish you all the best with your projects, with these fascinating projects. See you soon.
Thank you so much.